Hi, my name is Julian Carrington, and I'm a programmer with the Planet in Focus Environmental Film Festival, and it is my pleasure to be joined for a Q&A by Neva Kay, Emily McDowell, Mia Phipps, and Phil Stebbing, who collectively are the directors of High Tide, Don't Hide. Thank you all for making time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Typically, I begin Q&As with that standard question of what drew a filmmaker to the story or subject matter in question. But I think in your case, it's worth starting with your relationship with one another and maybe your working process, because obviously it's atypical to have quite so many creative voices on a film, but very cool. I understand that you work in sort of a consensus-based fashion and you work under the banner of the Rebel Film Collective. So can you maybe to begin with just tell us a little bit about how you came together and what sort of roles you each played in crafting High Tide, Don't Hide?
I nominate Phil and Neva to answer this question.
I second nomination.
Neva, I nominate you to start.
I was going to nominate you to start.
I nominated you first, so.
Okay.
This is a great example of consensus-based decision making.
Okay, so how did we get together? We got together on Facebook. And we were actually at the time looking at everything that was happening, and it was kind of, I think, like a lot of people, when the IPCC report came out, 2018 IPCC report, well, we've already had another one since then, that was quite, it was massive. I mean, I think for a lot of people it was. I mean, obviously all of us have known about the climate collapse that's coming, but it had that sort of deadline, we've got the 10 years, let's get started with doing something. And at the same time, Extinction Rebellion was sort of coming up and was also starting here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the School Strike for Climate. And we were kind of looking at, as filmmakers, how are we going to contribute to this sort of groundswell of action? And and we thought, let's start documenting what's happening. Let's start filming. And the Rebel Film Collective as an organization, as a collective, is more than the four of us. Actually, it's really people who have cameras, who had the ability to go to any of those sort of, whether it was an Extinction Rebellion event or a climate event, a climate strike event, just coming with their cameras, helping those groups to outreach, further. And that was really the initial sort of process. And then as that was happening, we started following also specific things that were happening. So I'm local to Thames, and once you see the film, you realize there was quite a lot happening here, and I was starting to follow it more closely, and kind of started to think, well, there's actually a whole film here. Phil and I were thinking at that stage, and then we started, growing it from there, and sort of as Helena and Lillian were becoming more connected to the national movement, we started looking at documenting more of that, and then. When everything started happening with Philly, we felt strongly that voice was really important to include in this narrative as well. And so the film kind of grew quite organically, and as it did, and quite actually, Nia came in quite early on, already with their experience with impact. We felt quite important that we wanted to make sure the film is impactful from the get-go. And as we started following Sophie, we brought Emily in, and as everyone that came in had so much to offer, and we felt that, we just had all hands on deck.
So is it fair to say that you come from a more sort of citizen journalist tradition, or have you each been making films independently sort of prior to coming together for this project?
Your turn, Phil.
Yeah, it's interesting because none of us knew each other really before making this film, so we kind of got to know each other doing it, and we've all got kind of various skills working within the industry. And what's really interesting is that there's not really a model for, I think, out there for what we're doing. We kind of made it up as we went along. And I think that's kind of the core of what the collective is about, is that you can go out there with cameras and create your own material, and then somehow work out a way to create a film out of it. One of the major problems I think we found was that there's not really many structures or funding groups out there that really saw us as a viable group of people to make a film that we did make. And we really struggled with all the funding applications, because they were like, who is your key creative? You know, what experience have you had? You know, where is this going? And we were like, well, we don't really fit into your model. So we're kind of a curious, you know, group of people really, in some ways, making this. And we've, through our own processes, we found out that we had to work out how to, as four of us, you know, make decisions collectively, you know, over everything, you know, the editing and the music and the graphics. So it was quite, in the background, there's quite a process that we went through, and it was quite interesting and challenging.
I can imagine.
Rewarding as well.
I can imagine. So it sounds like some of you, there was a natural sort of relationship to certain characters who might be local to you. So it made perfect sense, perhaps, for you know, whomever is based in, say, Thames or Auckland, to kind of capture those moments that were happening locally there. And you've begun to touch on sort of the process of editing it all together, bringing it all together. But I'd love to hear just a little bit more about how you make those decisions. Did you edit it as well, or did you bring in a seasoned editor to take on that responsibility?
We had an amazing editor called, extraordinary editor called Thomas, who went through all the footage, and with Neva's input and checking in and structuring, went through the first pass of the film. And then we all, through stage by stage by stage, watched what was happening, made our notes, put our notes to each other, talked through our converging and diverging points of view, and came to decisions point by point by point by point. And then Thomas would do more, we'd chuck it up. At one point, Thomas took a break, and we chucked the film back between us, cut it up, added bits, pulled all the pieces, and then asked Thomas to make sense of it again. So it was really reiteration after reiteration after reiteration. And we feel that that was a challenging process and rich, and in the end, this is true, isn't it, that we ended up feeling like the film was richer for it, because we all come from you know, we're all individuals with our own points of view, and sometimes you know, really advocated different parts being in for different reasons. And so there's a lot that's in the film which we've found means that a lot of different young people in particular can relate to its content.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, breaking the mold a little bit, but with some great results. Neva, you touched on this a little bit when you talked about how you came together initially, but I'm wondering, sort of going back to that typical question about the origin of a project. What drew you to want to tell this particular story? So obviously, you know, you talked about the IPCC report, being engaged with climate activism, but what drew you to want to tell the story of youth activism in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I mean, locally, you know, seeing Helena and Lillian becoming such leaders in our community, and their voice being so oppositional to the people in power, and that whole issue specifically for youth, because they can't vote. What they have is their voice. So amplifying that voice and giving it, the biggest platform we could is pretty much the biggest thing we can do to help them. And it's since then the latest report from the UN, I think, have shown that every single young person living today is going to be affected by at least 2 climate related afflictions. I'm not sure how to call them, like issues. This is a massive youth issue. This is like the biggest thing for our children, and we have children, as well, all of us. So yeah, that I think, giving that voice for youth, giving them the mic, giving them the platform is really the biggest thing we can do for climate action.
Yeah, I mean, we actually have a number of films at the festival this year. Youth v Gov being one of them that looks at another form of activism, I suppose, in the United States, bringing a court case and trying to use the legal system as a mechanism for this. But certainly we've seen it at PIF over the last few years. Obviously, Greta as well is such a global inspiration, where we're really seeing huge momentum among young people in this space. So it's wonderful to see, and also wonderful to see it globally. You're documenting a part of the world that obviously is quite remote from us, but the issues are obviously still so similar, really. So yeah, it's really cool to see over there. You touched on. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that in the film, we see that Helena is doing a submission on a bill that's going through Parliament, the zero carbon bill, that actually became an act, which meant that New Zealand is one of the few countries that's legally liable to get to net zero by 2050, and we don't have the policies in place to make that happen yet. And certainly before 2050, everything's going to have to happen, but at least we got it enshrined in law.
Yeah. There's actually another film that we're presenting, 7030, which looks at the passage of a climate act in Denmark. So yeah, that one is really interesting as well, to see a very ambitious legislative approach. So yeah, between sort of courts and legislative action, and then sort of good old-fashioned activism as well, I think we're seeing a multi-pronged approach, which is obviously called for. We need all hands, all avenues at this point. But I wanted to get into your characters a little bit more. And you've spoken about Lillian and Helena, who are really inspiring, but you've put together a really interesting group of characters. And I'm curious, how did you sort of specifically identify the young people that you were going to follow outside of Lillian and Helena, who we've heard a little bit about?
Can I just say something regarding that? Because I think it's something we haven't quite touched on yet regarding the characters. And it's quite clear that the point of power in the film is obviously bringing Aingangalafili's voice to the fore, and bringing the Pacific people's severe threat to their nations, and how that becomes quite a key. It becomes really the basis of what happens in our film that is maybe different from another film. And yeah, Aingangalafili, I think, was it Neva? You met her. How did you meet her? I don't actually know how you met her.
Through a friend that was organizing an event and invited her to speak. So through a friend from her wider community, it's a common friend. Yeah.
And then obviously we have Luke Wejohn, who is up here, who became a Green MP, ran as a Green MP in Mount Albert against our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. That's her electorate. He obviously didn't win, but he was sort of became quite prominent in the sense that he was quite prepared to stand up front quite early. So that was exciting. And Sophie Hanford, who Emily connected with in Wellington, who you see at the end did get voted in as a council representative.
Mm. Yeah, I actually, that was something I wanted to make sure to touch on specifically, because we have seen a few films address the mobilization of the youth climate movement, but yours was the first that I've seen to explicitly address the intersectionality or lack of intersectionality between settler activists and indigenous, or in this case, Pacifica activists. So yeah, was that like, clearly you saw that this was important and something you wanted to foreground. I'd love to know a little bit more about you know, that thinking and why that was so important to you.
I can jump in with that. So as Neva mentioned earlier, the film was developing organically. Initially, we were just following two characters, and then which were based in Thames, Helena, Lillian, and then there was, as you see in the film, there was a congregation of all the various strike leaders and representatives met up, and then then some news came through. I remember actually Neva came to the house and said, have you seen the news about on the project, which is a TV show, Philly was talking about how Pacifica youth had kind of been sidelined by the leadership, the school strike leadership. And it was like, what? And we were like, yeah, this was like a turn. And Neva said to me, she said, we've got to follow this up. So it was almost like, that's where the film was like, well, we've got to go and look into this. And we talked to one of the guys from Extinction Rebellion, and we told him about it, and he was like, what? Oh, really? And he kind of said, oh, well, maybe you should also speak to another guy who's also in the movement. And he gave us the name for Luke, who became in the film. So we contacted Luke, and he became part of the film. And as Neva said, we went to a meeting where Philly was speaking, and we basically asked her if she wanted to be in the film. And there was a bit of a process that we had to go through, and we had to really, put our credentials to her to say, this is where we're from, and this is where we want to make the film. And we had to go and meet her. Neva went and met her family, and it was, we had to I wouldn't say convince, but we had to show that we had integrity, and we really were on their side, as it were. So that's kind of how that process happened. And yeah, we moved forward. But it became, I think we recognized that it was a really important thing that we wanted to show what was going and happening with the Pacifica community, and how they were, really struggling with the Pakeha white dominated school strike movement.
So was it the case, Neva, you mentioned how Philly first came to your attention, but was it the case that you were following her prior to her appearance on that program, or was that really the catalyst to add her to the film?
That was the catalyst. So it's hard to understand that when you watch the film, because we did ended up getting some archive, and but with Luke and with Philly, that was the moment we started following them, and we kind of managed to backtrack and get some some archive to make sure that they're there from the start. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really skillfully done. And I think it also helps that you have an aesthetic that incorporates some self-documentation, which is quite organic to young people these days, but I think also allows you to kind of use footage that isn't necessarily signposted temporally, so you can kind of cut it together in a way that flows narratively. But it does introduce this interesting sort of question of like, oh wow, I wonder, were they always following these sort of parallel, for the culture and school strike movements, and then found this moment of convergence, or how is that done? So that is quite quite an ingenious facet of this film. It works really well. Was it always part of the concept to include that element of self-documentation?
We've introduced the cameras fairly early on with Helena and Lillian, and then as every time someone has, when we've found another young person we felt strongly should be in the film, we've offered them a camera as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's a great approach. I think actually another unique angle, and the self-documentation feeds into that, is that again, we're accustomed to seeing films about youth activists that really are, animated by their passion and their energy and their idealism and their hopefulness. But I think this film somewhat uniquely also gives us insight into the enormous pressures that these young people can take upon themselves. You have a few sort of confessional moments where your characters are really expressing just what a weight they feel they've taken on. Why was it important for you to showcase that element as well?
I think it's hard to avoid it, honestly, because anyone who watches the film has an emotional response in a similar vein. And even in the discussions that I'm personally privy to in the circles that I'm in with having two kids who are young, they are aware of, to a certain extent, especially my older one, and that level of implicit pressure and fear is ever present. All you have to do is be online or be aware of what's going on around us. And every year, everywhere, there are more and more events happening that are extreme, fires, floods, the list goes on. So it's so important to acknowledge and hold that forth, the anxiety, in the sense, because if we ignore it, then it's just denying those emotions as being valid. So it wasn't really so much a choice as how can we bolster this in a positive way to provide some solutions. And obviously a lot of that is about taking action, connecting, looking for where things are being done. And that became a lot of the behind the scenes work that we were doing as well. So talking about what we can prepare and the narratives of that anxiety. We're all very aware of the burdening generations after us to solve problems that we have been participating in along the way. So as we get older, there is an onus on us to provide those pathways to solution as well. So behind the scenes, we've talked about mental health. We've had advisors for mental health. We've got materials that support providing a safe space for discussions, and it's just such an important part of climate justice is getting through this sane and together, and finding solutions together. And so much of that is about mental health. So it's quite clear it's so much part of Helena, Lily, everyone's lives. The level of anxiety forces them to take action, and Greta herself talks about it. I used to feel anxious and upset, but now I've turned that into action, and such a positive way of spinning a quite clearly scary situation on a massive scale. So it wasn't so much a choice as a responsibility, I think, collectively.
I think also looking back at that time now, it seemed like as the student strike movement began, there was this gigantic sigh of relief from adults around the world going, thank goodness the kids are going to save us. Good on you kids, phew, okay, you're going to sort it out. And I think that was part of it too, that, the young people were going, what the heck is suddenly the world's in tatters and it's on us to sort it. And do you guys feel this too? It seems like that's sort of been tempered a little bit with realizing that we all have to take responsibility in this historically and in the present and going forward. What do you think? Was that changed?
I think people are still hoping the inspiring youth will change the world somehow. And I don't know. I'm not sure that that pressure is off them yet.
I sort of feel I definitely felt excited by the groundswell, but as a tired activist, you know, when you've been doing stuff for a long time, as we all have, to see the numbers that were turning up for Greta, those numbers were so exciting and heartening in so many ways. It's like, okay, it's more than just 5 of us down at the Shell station, you know. I think that was maybe part of the reason. I don't want to make excuses for older generation, but I mean, has it changed? I don't know. I think that the pressure for change is still there. It's increasingly urgent every day. Yes, there are, you know, 2030 plans and, you know, commitments by governments and such, but I think it's the keeping the pressure up. And if there are more numbers globally putting pressure on to hold those goals to account, then we need everybody.
I think going back to your point, Julian, about the film and why we put those intimate moments in there. I think as filmmakers, we had big discussions about them. You know, showing young people revealing their feelings, crying on camera. And, you know, you do interviews and it's a different thing, but when you've given them cameras and they're in their bedrooms and they're really showing off their feelings and their emotions, I think maybe I'm speaking for myself, I felt that it was really important to show those moments to adults, especially to show that young people are deeply, deeply affected, and they see what's going on and they want to do something about it. And, you know, they're powerless and their vulnerability is really clear in that footage. And maybe it's slightly callous, but I wanted adults personally to really be affected by that emotionally, and to say young children really are seeing this clearly. And adults, in many ways, are turned off, they're switched off, and they're just letting the situation pass them by. But young people are. And when you see a 15-year-old girl crying because she feels completely powerless and almost destroyed about what she's going to be realizing is happening to her future, I thought, well, look, adults should look at that and go, we need to do something for young people. It's a really visceral moment that you rarely get in a film. And I'm hoping it will challenge an audience to connect with that moment. And what's been really interesting is that we've shown the film in cinemas, and the first kind of screening when we showed it in Auckland, there was a lot of tears in the cinema. And I think those moments, and I don't think we're trying to exploit the audience or exploit the, you know, our contributors, but I think it's really important because this is such a massive moment in our lives, and you know, they really sum it up better than we can, I think, as adults with words, and that's one of the reasons why those images are in there.
I was actually going to ask what you learned from your characters, but I think that answer is a great response, and I'm mindful of our time, which is limited. So maybe just to bring the conversation to a close, I can ask you to let folks know how they can get involved. And I noticed that there's a website that you share at the end of the film, hightide-don'thide.com. What would people find there if they were to visit the site, and what are some next steps for viewers who want to become involved?
Who wants to answer that?
You do.
Emily?
Yeah, who's on Impact?
Well, I am. I can talk about it. We all are, actually. We all are. so we have, yes, you can sign up on our website. You can have a look at some of the resources there. We have some suggestions there of how people can take action. Personally, my advice to people is to connect to others in real life who take action. That is my single most important piece of advice, because we live our lives online. And I feel that connecting to like-minded people is the most powerful thing that you can do, and taking action in your community, lobbying your government. So working on whatever level is appropriate, because some people want to be out front and some people don't, and yet they still want to contribute. And something that I found with some of the Q&As that we've already had, where there have been students present, is this need to, as you say, process the emotion. And so there are obviously resources on our website about that. And but also there are, you know, some people that just don't want to be out front, but how do they take action? So it is about, I personally think it is about connecting to like-minded souls and moving forward together and working out your plan, much like we did. Anyone else want to add anything specifically? Yeah,
I was wondering, Emily, I don't want to have diverted you from your opportunity to maybe get the last word in. So please, if you have anything to add.
Actually, that's number one on our list, is to connect. It's connect with, and we've got a Aotearoa New Zealand focused selection of groups that people can look into to connect. So in Canada, I'm sure there are similar resources of many groups of like-minded people. Speaking personally for myself, just very quickly, I've found going through a structured process of called active hope training is been a really useful way to deal with some of the stresses that we talked around about activism. It's a free course that's online now. Yeah, anybody else? Well, we've got a little bit of time left.
Yeah, I'll add one thing for it, is that additionally, from that climate justice perspective, is look into what group already exists that are from an indigenous or, you know, those who are more vulnerable, most going to be affected fastest from the climate catastrophe, and amplify, see what they need, how are they needing support, and use your privilege to do that.
Can I just ask that if anyone who watches this and has an idea, who is in Canada, who wants to suggest some things for our website from a Canadian point of view, please connect with us. We would love to add, as the film moves around the world, we would love to add other places. And yeah, if anyone has been moved by the film and wants to connect in any way, either filmmaking or have some support, we are open to hearing from you. And so please make contact, and yeah, please send us any links to groups from your area. We would be more than happy to put them on our platform and connect with you.
Can people find contact information for you on the website?
Yeah.
Terrific. Okay. Well, that's a wonderful note on which to end it. So I'll just say thank you all again for a really wonderful and important film.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.